Hey, you there. Do you like Magic the Gathering? You like casting spells? What about robots? Do you salivate at the thought of Pacific Rim, blurring the lines between the organic mind of the pilot and the machine body they fill? Do you ever find yourself crying at the beauty of Warframe's inherent transgender themes? Do you like it when there is a robot, just like in general? If you said yes to any of the above, congratulations! You've fallen right into the center of the comically suspended piano trap that is the intersection of my two special interests. Today, I want to talk about robots in Magic the Gathering. But before that, I can hear you asking psychically, who is this guy? And why won't they shut up about robots? Let me introduce myself. My name is Hen, or I write robots on the internet. Self-described robot kisser and Urtet's #1 fan. I'm a science fiction writer with robots being the subject of pretty much everything I write. I know, shocker, right? I write a lot of short stories and I publish a web novel called Interface about robots and people with electrosenses. If that sounds interesting, you can read it at iwriterobots.com, but it's not really the focus of this video. And it's still being written, I promise. I'm also a massive nerd about Magic the Gathering. The first set I ever played was New Phyrexia, back around 2011. At the time, it was the Magic set for robots, taking place on the artifact-heavy plane of Mirrodin. I quickly fell in love with Infect and the Mirror, my beloved, and I've never been normal about robots for even a second since then. Magic's robots fascinate me, the way they vary across the different worlds, from filigree flying machines to bipedal cogwork marvels to just silly little guys with almost beak-like helmets for heads. So, with my brief introduction out of the way, why don't we talk about these robots and their various designs? This is Defining Robots in Magic the Gathering. Everyone good to go? Got your bingo sheets? Oh, shoot, I totally forgot the bingo sheets. Give me a second to rummage something up. Whoa, bingo sheets be upon ye. Pause the video and take a screen grab or something, I don't know. If you get a bingo though, comment or tweet at me for the validation we all crave in the year of our Lord 2024. And feel free to mark off stuff retroactively if I've already said it, it really doesn't matter. Now, time to talk about robots. Let's start with a basic definition to get a scope of what we're talking about. What is a robot? The term robot actually comes from a 1920s Czech play by Karl Čapek called Rossum's Universal Robots in English. The Czech term coined here, roboti, comes from the Czech robota, which just means forced labor. The play revolved around a factory that opened up to create automated workers out of synthetic organic materials. So yeah, in the play, these robots aren't even machines, they're really more like clones or replicants. The robots work for humans, hence forced labor, until they grow discontent, at which point they rebel and extinguish the human species. Fun times, really. Now, obviously the play isn't really about robots as we know them today. It's a satire, making commentary on the arbitrarily appointed lower status of the working class. This isn't really why I bring up the play. I could talk about Rossum's for a long time, long enough to be its own video entirely, but that wouldn't really be about Magic the Gathering. I mostly bring up the play just because it's worth noting in our discussion of robots that this is where the term comes from. Rossum's is the first time the word robot was ever used in a published work, the place where it really began to enter the public lexicon. Obviously, since then the word itself has become somewhat divorced from its source material. As technology has modernized, our concept of what an automated worker might be has modernized as well. Today, the most common understanding of the word robot is a mechanical humanoid being, like the kind so prevalent in science fiction. In fact, Dictionary.com even defines a robot as a machine that resembles a human, but I think most folks would agree with stretching that definition to include mechanical facsimiles of all life, and not just the human adjacent. After all, modern robots in media come in thousands of different forms and flavors, from mech suits with no mind of their own to mech suits with a mind of their own to humanoid minds in mechanical shells, or machine minds in human shells, or even biomechanical bots that fall somewhere in between. As a quick aside, if you haven't read Martha Wells' Murderbot Diaries, do yourself a favor and check them out. They are phenomenal. Now, despite their differences, all of these examples here are still robots, their life in mechanical form. And that's really all there is to being a robot, at least with today's understanding. So, now that we've established what a robot is, let's talk about Magic the Gathering. How does this game define a robot? Well, Magic goes about defining its game pieces in a couple of different key ways, such as with supertypes and subtypes. Now, there's not a supertype for robot, but there actually is a subtype, so let's start there. Magic the Gathering has 28... Oh, shit, wait, well, the Doctor Who set is a thing now. Okay. Magic the Gathering has 31... Oh, well, I guess Fallout just released 2, huh? I think that had a robot or two in it. Okay, so Magic the Gathering has 45... Oh, Jesus, really? 45? That's more than we've got of crabs, did you know that? And we've had crabs since Tempest. Okay, anywho, we've got 45 typal robots in the game right now. 13 of those are clown or clown adjacent, having first appeared in Unfinity. After that, we got 15 more from the Transformers cards that released as a sort of hidden bonus sheet in Brothers War. We got exactly 3 from Doctor Who, and just recently we've acquired 14 more from Fallout, putting it pretty much on par with everyone's favorite robots in disguise. Now, I am not a fan of the robot creature type for a number of reasons that I won't get too into right now. But for the purposes of identifying what a robot in Magic is, I think it's worth stating that these robot type creatures are really bad indicators of that. For starters, none of the cards here are canon to Magic's universe. You won't find any creatures like these on Dominaria or Kaladesh. That's because the robot creature type is exclusively reserved for cards from outside of Magic's canon universe, so to speak, such as the Unsets or, more recently, the Universe Beyond products. So, strictly speaking, there are no robot-typal creatures that exist within the Magic universe. They're all jokes and content crossovers from universes beyond. This, of course, doesn't explain why robots can be seen in Magic cards from across the game's 30-plus year history, since well before the introduction of the robot subtype in 2022 with Unfinity. So, let's just set the robot creature type aside for now and take a look at some of the robots from the game's standard release sets. These cards aren't labeled with any creature type so straightforward as robot, but by looking at them, maybe we can get a good idea of what other types count as robots within the Magic universe. How about Soldevi Sentry? We can all agree this is a robot, right? I mean, look at that chrome dome and those gleaming yellow eyes that say, I have a problem with my liver, gallbladder, or pancreas. This man is a machine. Soldevi Sentry is a great example of what early robots in Magic were depicted like. So, what creature type is it? Well, I actually don't know the creature type for Soldevi Sentry off the top of my head. Let me check. A soldier? Huh? Okay. That isn't what I was expecting, but that isn't so weird if you know anything about Soldev, and Brothers War gave us a lot more of those robot soldiers. Whatever. Maybe Soldevi Sentry isn't the best pick. Let's try a different example, maybe a creature that's more modern but still pre-Unfinity. These creatures are both clearly robots, correct? They're mechanical facsimiles of living organisms like we talked about before. What creature type do these robots fall under? Okay, I am beginning to think this game is just messing with me. Let's try a different approach. Oh, I know. Let's look at some more established robots in Magic. Something like a legendary creature, perhaps. Legendary creatures are often developed characters with lore and world building. Surely a legendary robot would be a great indicator of what creature type is a robot for Magic, right? Nope! Brea is a human, Memnarch is a wizard, Golos is a scout, and of course, Karn is a golem. Karn is perhaps one of the oldest named robots in Magic the Gathering, and certainly one of the characters that people think of when talking about Magic's particular flavor of robotics. I take issue with that, so here's a brief tangent to clarify. A golem isn't a robot. If you're unfamiliar, golem is a term from Jewish folklore, specifically from the Golem of Prague, and traditionally it represents animated mud, clay, or dust given life through divine means. They were magical workers of sorts, animated with a purpose to aid their creator, and in that way I suppose they fit within the robota definition of a robot. They certainly are created beings of forced labor. But that's not really the modern understanding of a robot like the kind we're talking about here. Golems aren't mechanical. They're honestly more akin to elementals, which we can see by looking at cards like Geode Golem. This card is also a golem, but you wouldn't call it a robot, right? So, golems just aren't robots. They're a concept from Jewish culture that fantasy as a genre has taken and run away with, and magic, or rather Wizards of the Coast as a whole perhaps, has done the same. Please do not get me started on the card Phylactery Lich. This, in particular, is something that really irks me with Magic the Gathering robots, but we'll come back to this. Maybe. For now, just consider that golem doesn't equal robot, at least not outright. Let's get back on track here. Where were we? Oh, that's right. Robot creature types. So, as our past examples have illustrated, there's not a very succinct subset of creature types for robots, at least not like we've seen with other grouped creature types. I think that's a good thing. Not constraining robot creatures to one of just a couple creature types means that we get infinitely more variety across the game's depiction of robots. It also tells us so much about the worlds these robots come from. Soldevi Sentry is a soldier because to the people of Dominaria, this is a soldier just as much as this is, a byproduct of years of mechanical warfare. Weldfast Monitor is just a lizard because life on Kaladesh goes so far beyond the organic, with people like the Aetherborn and highly advanced living machines. This is also a big part of why I'm not a fan of the universe's Beyond robot subtype. The robot subtype does the opposite of everything I just talked about. It homogenizes this creative design space within the game. The robot subtype takes that aspect of the game's world building away from the cards, which I'd like to think is why it is confined to sets outside of Magic's canon universe. I'll legitimately be so sad if they ever bring this subtype to black-bordered Magic, so to speak. We'll lose a lot of the world building that's baked into the cards. But let's focus on the good robot subtypes instead. Sure, robots can be whatever subtype we want them to be, but which ones really scream mechanical all on their own? Let's look at those legendary creatures one more time for some examples. I personally think that Construct is the most evocative and perhaps literal creature type for a robot in Magic. The Peregrine Dynamo is the spitting image of a robot creature. This is Magic in 2024, so I could not tell you where this card comes from for the life of me, but hot damn if that isn't a robot. I realize Cody is not the best example here, but of the 208 constructs in Magic, only 3 are legendary, so he gets to be an honorary robot today. Then, of course, there are Golems, which I've already stated I'm not a fan of and don't think count as robots intrinsically. But despite that inaccuracy, they are sometimes used as a shorthand for magical robots within the game. I'm willing to silently scream to myself about it for now. Lastly, there's also the broadest category of creature type examples, where robotic or mechanically appearing creatures are creature typed by their species or profession. This can be a bit hit or miss. Good examples of this are cards like Tetsin, Liberator, or Urtet, my beloved, where the species they're typed by is a creature type that is only used in the context of robots, being gnomes, thopters, or Mir. Then there are the less precise examples, such as Brutaclad originally being just an artificer, or Brea and Silas Wren, who are literally just humans. So, still looking at the text on the cards here, what makes these creatures still seem like robots to us, if their creature types aren't really that mechanically inclined? Well, if you've been paying attention, you'll have noticed something. These are all artifacts. Good job if you noticed that. Give yourself 10 points and take a piece of candy. So, is it that simple? Is a robot in Magic just any old artifact? No, of course not. While artifact is the primary supertype used to signify the mechanical and the inorganic for Magic, it obviously encompasses a large swath of non-robotic concepts as well. Vehicles, equipment, and even lands can be artifacts, but you wouldn't necessarily call any of these robots. I also don't think it's as simple as equating robots to being any artifact creature, as a quick survey of the artifact creatures in the game will have you running into statues, walls, and scarecrows, none of which are very robotic. So clearly defining a robot in Magic isn't strictly about supertypes or subtypes, but rather a secret third thing that we've already seen here and there across this entire video. An aspect of all Magic cards that transcends the mere rules text of the game pieces. Art! Magic the Gathering as a world is built so much by the art of the cards and the narratives told through that art. Before you even read what the card Shock does, you see art of a man being shot with lightning and understand that this card shoots lightning. Then, the rules text of the card tells you how shooting lightning mechanically takes place within the rules of the game. The same is true for creatures, though not every creature is as straightforwardly named as Bear Cub. You don't always intrinsically understand what it is you're summoning. When I cast the spell Core Tapper, I don't know what a Core Tapper is until I look at the card and see a small, dare I say kissable, mechanical being. This art, in turn, fulfills our understanding of the card's own typeline. We wouldn't know what a mirror creature is or what it means for a creature to be an artifact without the visual assistance of the art here. In this way, the art on Magic cards fundamentally informs our understanding of what our cards are when we cast a spell. If cards didn't have this art, it would be impossible to really understand what a number of Magic's original creatures are. Without having ever seen the art, could you tell me what an Atog is? What about a Brushwag? Or a Dothy? This is why art is vital to our understanding of what makes a robot in Magic the Gathering. The art on Magic cards visually contextualizes what the typeline, name, and rules text of the card even mean. So let's review before we go further. We know that a creature's status as a robot in Magic is in part determined by its subtype, supertype, and/or its art. But how do these three aspects come together to make that distinction? And what happens if one of these aspects doesn't align with the others? Before we get too deep into solving that equation, let's look at an example, starting at the beginning of Magic the Gathering. One of the first 4 artifact creatures in the game, going all the way back to Alpha, is Juggernaut, which appears to depict some kind of siege tower with a face on it. Would you call this a robot? Maybe, but it's no more a robot than a battering ram or a car is a robot, right? You can mark Grand mentioned off on your bingo sheets now. This original Juggernaut printing gives us very little to work with if we want to define it as a robot. It's an artifact, sure, but it lacks a subtype altogether as artifact creatures once did. Of course, it's been errated since then, and today we know its creature type is Juggernaut. But what is a Juggernaut? On the artificial plane of Mirrodin, the Juggernauts are robots. Here, the art informs the typeline like we talked about earlier. Mirrodin's levelers are machines who roam the world leveling the ground as a sort of maintenance. They're like automated land janitors. Robota, even. But Juggernaut here isn't a leveler of Mirrodin. It lacks the same visual context that the levelers have. So the Juggernaut creature type doesn't always equate to a creature being a robot. If we look at other older Juggernaut cards, we can see this is true. Our Alpha Juggernaut here is a lot closer in form to something like Odyssey's Otarian Juggernaut, which definitely isn't a robot either. I mean, look at it. It's a wooden vehicle of some kind, right? So where does that leave our Alpha Juggernaut? It's an artifact, but its art and creature type don't appear to be robotically indicative. Let's reframe things a little bit and instead look at this art for the same card that we got in M15 from much beloved Magic artist Kev Walker. Would you call this a robot? Almost certainly. We don't have to think about it like we do with Alpha's art. This is a robot. we've traded the wooden paneling and simple wheels for a steel quadrupedal walking machine. This card's art screams mechanically evocative. But what about the rest of the card? Does this art back up the rest of the card's identity? Yes! Juggernaut is still an artifact, a created inorganic being. And while its subtype is a little iffy on its robotic nature, the art and supertype here pull enough weight to really make this feel like a robotic creature, even without the subtype's contributions. Without a doubt, this is a robot. With this example in mind, here's my proposed equation of what makes a Magic the Gathering card a robot. I determined this by doing what we just did with Juggernaut. I look for mechanically evocative art, an artifact supertype, and or a robot-like subtype of some kind. If a card meets 2 out of 3 of these criteria, I call it a robot. Because I only require 2/3 criteria, non-artifact creatures can still be robots based on their art and subtype. And some non-creature artifacts can meet the requirements as well, which I think is fitting. Sometimes robots are organic, like in Rossum's Universal Robots. Other times they're non-sentient or simply personified household appliances, like my Roomba, who I've affectionately named Vac Unit despite the 100% certainty that it is selling my user data to the brokers of New Capenna. I'm in severe +1/+1 counter debt. Let's talk about subtypes again real quick. What constitutes a thematic subtype for a robot? The subtypes are kind of up to personal interpretation, but here's a quick cheat sheet of creature types that I think are solidly a point in favor of a creature card being a robot. Please note that this is for creatures, so of course equipment here only applies to reconfigure creatures, all of which I would consider to be robots. I mean, look at this guy. Most of the rest of these are self-explanatory. Perhaps the most straightforward are constructs and assembly workers, the latter of which even have a few lands flavored as factories which produce or turn into assembly workers themselves. Talk about flavorful. Others here on the list are creature types made specifically for Magic's original takes on robot creatures, the species types we talked about earlier, such as the Thopters, the Gnomes, and the Mirror, my beloved. We also have Dreadnought, which only has 4 creature cards in the game, all of which are giant mechs and or a shrimp. And 2 of these are universes beyond, I guess. And then lastly, Walrus is on the list because the only walrus in the entirety of Magic is a robot. So if it's a walrus you're looking at, it must be a robot. Truly, my logic is impeccable. Now, before you go trying to Diogenes me by holding up a rug and declaring, "Behold, a robot!" I want to clarify that this is not a perfect classification system. This is simply a tool you can use to help yourself understand how the complex components of a Magic card can come together to define what might qualify as a robot within the context of the game's universe. Rugs, dolls, and other animated objects tend to give my little Magic the Gathering CAPTCHA test a hard time because of how broadly artifact is applied as a supertype. Additionally, a lot of Phyrexians don't qualify for robot status, despite their well-established biomechanical origins in universe. This is typically because of the vast diversity of Phyrexian depictions we have in art, coupled with the fact that not every Phyrexian is an artifact. I'm okay with that. I don't think every Phyrexian is strictly a robot by default. Now, this may be blasphemy as far as the machine orthodoxy is concerned. I'm well aware and dutifully await my execution, so no worries. Phyrexians have machine-like qualities or are often derived from a machine, but still frequently play within the realm of being organic in some capacity. That's fine. I really wouldn't call them cyborgs, that term just doesn't feel right for the flavor, but maybe they're closer to being defined as another kind of middle ground classification, somewhere between organic and robotic. Their occasional inability to define as a robot within my system here is largely a conflict of translating in-universe lore and world building into needing to fit within the mechanics of the game. More importantly, however, I've already illustrated how robots weren't and aren't always strictly machines in other media, so I'm content knowing that any given Phyrexian card is probably robotic in nature to some extent, even if it can't pass my silly little flavor test. That all being said, I do tend to count the Phyrexian creature type as a point in favor of being a robot, so tack that onto the subtype list too, I guess, right under Walrus. Let's finally get on to the fun stuff. Time for a couple example problems so I can illustrate how this works. Starting with one of the most well-known robots in Magic, literally called Sad Robot by the player base, let's take a look at Solemn Simulacrum. I think its art is sufficiently robot-y across a handful of its printings, and it is an artifact. As for creature type, I personally don't count Golem as being sufficiently robot in terms of creature type. I did say we'd come back to this, didn't I? But as you can see here, that doesn't matter. By passing 2 out of 3 of the required criteria, Sad Robot is still a robot. Now, please note that this might not hold up across every art for the card, just as we saw with Juggernaut. If another Simulacrum art is more Golem than it is robot, our sad friend here won't meet the 2 out of 3 criteria, and that particular card won't qualify as a robot. I wanted to start with this example because it illustrates how the system has some creative flexibility to it, which lets us have robots in Magic even when some part of that card's translation into the game mechanics puts it at odds with our concept of a robot as a whole. Robots aren't golems, we know that, but the rest of this card is still robot enough to overshadow the game's choice of creature type in this instance. Let me show you a few other corner cases where my 2 out of 3 criteria works best. Vehicles are a tricky one. As we talked about before, I wouldn't call a car a robot. Using the 2 out of 3 criteria here means that we can be more nuanced than simply declaring that every vehicle in the game isn't a robot. Let's look at Mobiliser Mech. This card is clearly a robot. It literally has mech in the name, which harkens back to our Pacific Rims, our Gundams, and our Shrimp, or rather, our Dreadnoughts. Mobiliser gets robot points for the art and supertype, even if its subtype isn't a robot-invoking subtype. Here, the art is the deciding factor once again, where you can see that this same test wouldn't hold up on another vehicle, such as Oval Chase Dragster. Moving on to another weird corner case, let's take a look at what I was saying earlier about Phyrexians. God, I love Phyrexians. Phyrexians are a great source of non-artifact robots. Here's a personal favorite of mine, Blade Splicer. Right off the bat, we don't have an artifact supertype. That being said, this creature's body appears to be incredibly mechanical, all the way up to the neck and even a little ways beyond that. I give it a thumbs up for robotic art. This creature has also been errataed to include the new Phyrexian creature type, which we can see on the most recent printing of the card, so we'll give it the point for subtype as well. This brings us to the coveted 2 out of 3 that we need to be a robot. Easy, right? Now, a chunk of Phyrexians play out this same way, with each color leaning into their respective visual language for the mechanical aspects of Phyrexia's spheres. Red Phyrexians frequently get the point in art for being primarily constructed of metal plating. Our blue friends of the Surgical Bay get the point pretty easily for their cable management and LED gamer lights. And even black Phyrexians can play along pretty well, as their necrotizing bodies often betray the mechanical frames underneath. But this visual language isn't present 100% of the time, and colors in Phyrexia like white and green prefer to lean into the organic side a lot more than the mechanical. Without an artifact supertype to back it up, this is where most Phyrexians lose their robot status within my system. Let's look at an example of this. This is Atraxa. You might know her from being a general menace in Standard right now to being a general menace in Commander. Just like our prior example, Atraxa isn't an artifact, but she is a Phyrexian. This leaves her robot status entirely up to her art. And, well, I don't know about you guys, but Atraxa just doesn't look very robotic to me. The phrase I've been using to describe these cards' art thus far has been mechanically evocative. It evokes or brings to mind the idea of a machine. Sadly, I just don't get that impression from Atraxa. Visually, she takes heavily after the clean porcelain motif of the other white Phyrexians, which leaves her lacking in the mechanical department. With 2 points against and only 1 point for, that means Atraxa isn't a robot judging by our system. But I think that makes sense. Just because the Phyrexians are mechanical in some aspect doesn't mean they're necessarily robots. Like we defined at the top of the video, a robot is life in mechanical form. And the Phyrexians are, well, they're not entirely mechanical. They're kind of their own thing. It's weird. Phyrexians have always been depicted as being organic in some capacity, and we can see this reflected in a lot of the art. Converted Phyrexians are often left with lingering organics of whatever they were before, and non-converted Phyrexians are sometimes entirely organic, such as the germs. Because of this, I think it's fair to say that Phyrexians are mechanical in nature, but not necessarily 100% robots. This feeds back into the same idea I was talking about earlier with creative diversity for robots in the game. Every Phyrexian being inherently a robot is so much less interesting than picking apart the nuances of where the machine begins and the organics end. Wouldn't you agree? Going back to Atraxa with all of this in mind, a non-robot status makes sense now, and is even contextualized by the card itself. If you didn't know, Atraxa wasn't always a Phyrexian. Originally, she was an angel, who Elish Norn captured and completed, allowing the other Praetors to also add their own touches to her new form, hence her title as the Praetor's voice and her 4-color identity. Only Urabrask refused to contribute, it's a long story. It stands to reason then that she isn't 100% mechanical, like the other completed examples we talked about. And we can apply that same kind of logic to every Phyrexian card that doesn't meet our robotic criteria. They're probably a crude conversion of organic life or just otherwise biomechanical inherently. This video is long enough as is, so I won't make us work through another example, don't worry. Phyrexians are a very unique portion of Magic's robot design, so I felt the need to elaborate on them further like this. But for now, our homework can be done. Class is officially dismissed. So that's really all there is to it. I hope these examples have illustrated how my 2 out of 3 system works while accounting for creative differences across art, translating game mechanics into robotic themes, and being flexible across a variety of creature types. This is my robot formula for everything from simple Thopters to hulking dreadnoughts to silly little guys with beak-like helmets for heads. I would have loved to work more Mir into this presentation, but they're pretty cut-and-dried robots, so there isn't much to talk about. Maybe I'll gush over my love of them in another video, though. I think Magic's approach to robots is incredibly nuanced and infinitely more creative than simply slapping a robot creature type onto anything vaguely mechanical. As someone who really loves robots, this game's approach to depicting them makes me so happy. Every set that releases has me scanning for new, kissable metal friends. The most recent addition to my personal favorites has been Silver Deputy from Outlaws of Thunder Junction. God, just look at this guy. That's a robot! I should wrap things up here. I hope you found this entertaining, informative, or somewhere in between. If you liked this video and want to see more like it, let me know. I've been experimenting with this video format, and I've got more Magic thoughts I'd like to share. If you're interested in some of my non-Magic work, you can find it at iwriterobots.com, or you can follow me on my other socials for more Magic thoughts at iwriterobots. Oh, and let me know if you got a bingo too. Feel free to comment below or tweet at me with your bingo sheets and I'll retweet it or something. Until next time though, I've been Hen or I Write Robots. Kiss a robot on the mouth and take it easy.